else. Says he may have some copies on his table back there a little later. So to proceed now, I would like to introduce a young man that I met some time ago, many years ago, as a matter of fact. I've known about him for years before that because he was a very active researcher when he was still on active duty in the Army, and he got into a lot of trouble over it, but he didn't give up. He proceeded anyway. When he retired from the Army, he continued his research. He was a thorn in the side of authorities over there in the area where he was, in the White Sands Missile Test Range area. And he has some of the most interesting information that he's managed to collect over these years. May I introduce my good friend, Chief Master Sergeant Clifford Stone.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please bear with me. I am not normally given to give talks, but I definitely want to hit up on some of the aspects of the research that I've been doing. But I kind of feel like the young man that his dad wanted him to go to church, so the young man, loving his father, went ahead and agreed and went to church. Went to Sunday school class, and the lesson that day was about the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. So the young man went home, and his father met him, and he says, "Okay, son, what did you learn today?" He says, "Well, Dad, they told us about the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea." He says, "Okay, did you listen?" He said, "Yes, sir." "Did you learn anything?" "Yes, sir." "Well, what did they tell you?" "Well, Dad, they told us that the situation was they went to the Pharaoh, Noah did, asked that the children be released, the children of Israel be released. First, Pharaoh said no, informed Moses that they were not going to release them. Well, then God went ahead and sent the chemical troops in and used biological warfare against them, causing them to have all kinds of diseases and things of this sort. So Pharaoh didn't want to deal with that, so he went ahead and stated he would release the children of Israel. So they went ahead and released the children of Israel. After they were gone and got to the Red Sea, Moses went ahead and said, "Okay, we're going to have to cross the Red Sea, but we don't have any boats." So Moses got on the phone, he notified the Army Corps of Engineers, and they came and built a bridge. By this time, the Pharaoh had second thoughts and decided he still needed the slaves and needed the children of Israel as slaves. So he sent his troops to take possession of the children of Israel once more. So here came the Egyptian army. Now they were going to go ahead and use the same bridge, but once all the children of Israel got across safely, then he went ahead and Moses called the Army Air Force in, and they sent in dive bombers and they blew up the bridge and thus killed all the Egyptian troops that was on there. Well, his father looked at him kind of puzzled, and he said, "Son, is that what they really told you?" Son thought for a minute, and he said, "No, Dad, but if I told you what they told me, you wouldn't believe it." And that's about how we stand with UFOs. For 22 and a half years, I served in the United States Army. You need to know that as a child, I really wanted to serve my country. That when I was a teenager, that I felt my country could do no wrong. My country had a direct line to God. If my country did anything, God okayed it. I went and I tried to enlist. We had a strange war going on then. It was called the Vietnam War, and a lot of people were against it. But I felt I had to go. I had that obligation. So I went down to enlist in the Army. Felt real good about it. Going in the delayed entry program. I was still in high school, which meant that I had 6 months to finish high school before I could go in. Then I got the sad news. I was 4F. I was never going to go into the military. 6 months later, at that time they had the draft on, and every 6 months you had to go back for reevaluation. You were permanently medically disqualified for service. You would still go back for reevaluation. So I went to Ashland, Kentucky, at the Armed Forces Entrance Examination Station there, and I was led to believe that a colonel who was visiting there from someplace else, a medical doctor, felt that I was very patriotic and I really wanted to get in. Needless to state, I got in. I went ahead, I was given the choice. Well, you know, you could be drafted, but if you really want to enlist, we'll go ahead and let you enlist. So I enlisted. It was over the 4th of July weekend, and I thought, well, I'll be spending 4th of July weekend at some military installation. Well, knowing I wasn't going to go ahead and go to Canada, they went ahead and let me go home. So I went back and announced to God and country that I'm going into the military. I felt great. I was really proud to be able to go into the service. When I came back that Monday, which was July 8th, which was the date that I enlisted in '68, I was very concerned. I ran into some people there at the draft board while I was waiting for transportation to take me to the AFI station to send me to my first assignment, which would be basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. I ran into a couple of the ladies that worked in the draft board, and they said, "What are you doing there?" Well, I wasn't going to tell them the truth. I mean, I was going to tell them that I'm here to buy some stamps. And they went ahead and said, "Okay, you're here at 5 in the morning, and the post office doesn't open till 9. I said, "Yes, ma'am, but I want to be first in line." I mean, that's all I could think of. They knew what I was there for, but I was sweating it until I got to basic, went through basic, and I felt real good. Then I went on to AIT. I was going to be a 71 Bravo. That's a clerk typist. Well, I decided, wait a minute, I don't want to be a clerk. If I'm in, they had what was called the Warrant Officers Flight Aviation Program. Let me fly helicopters. I was immediately talked out of that by virtue of, look, we know you were medically rejected. We also know that the medical situation will never leave you. You will carry it to the grave with you. Let's don't press our luck. Well, I was in the Army, so I wasn't going to fight it. Went on to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. That's where AIT was going to be, and I was going to be a clerk typist. Ladies and gentlemen, I never attended one day of school there. The first 3 days, I handed out medical records at the hospital there. Then I was put on cleanup detail on the 4th day. There I was to meet a gentleman that would change my life. He happened to be on special assignment to the Post Intelligence Office at Fort Jackson, and there we started to discuss UFOs. Well, my mama didn't raise no fools, so I was not going to go ahead and let him know that I was interested in UFOs. I was in the Army, and I wasn't going to go ahead and say anything to anyone about me having an interest. But he brought it up. He knew about my interest. So from that time to the time I graduated, which, by the way, I did graduate, all the tests that I never took, I passed. Never saw a typewriter. Never, ever laid my hands on a typewriter. But I want you to know that to this day, I have to hunt and peck on a typewriter. But when I saw what I did on that test, I myself was impressed. According to the United States Army, I could type 78 words a minute with no errors. This is not the case. I went on after that to my first duty assignment. When I got to my first duty assignment, that was Fort Lee, Virginia. I was assigned to the 36 Civil Affairs, 96 Civil Affairs, 36 Civil Affairs Company, 96 Civil Affairs Group. There, I thought I was going to have a problem. I can't type, and they're going to make me a clerk typist, capable of typing 78 words a minute. Well, the first sergeant there, the first thing he did was read me my rights. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm 2 days early. What's going on? Well, my contract kind of said that I had enlisted for 3 years, but I enlisted in the United States Air Force for 3 years. Well, after convincing them that I really did enlist in the Army, I thought the matter was closed. I also at that time said, listen, I'm really not that good of a typist. Then he went back and talked to the captain, and the captain came out and says, well, wait a minute, it says here you can type 78 words a minute. I said, yes, sir, I don't know what darn fool put that down there, but he got me mixed up with someone else. So I go ahead, wind up having to use a situation where I can't type. Individual shows up that I'm still not sure who that person was, says, how would you like to be involved as the NBC NCO? Well, First Sergeant Weeks, who's my first sergeant, says, listen, this guy knows nothing except when he went through the gas chamber there at Basic about NBC, well, training. So the next morning, I get up, go down. I am now the unit, NBC, for those of you who don't know, that's Nuclear, Biological, Chemical Warfare, non-commissioned officer, and I am now also the Communications NCO. Anytime I say NCO, that stands for non-commissioned officer. So I felt real good about this. We had to go to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I had to take my OIC because I was put on what was called a quick reaction team. These are teams that are placed all over the United States on a 24-hour basis to go out if there was, say, an NBC accident, say a train derailed that was carrying toxic chemicals. And if it was in our area of operation, then we would be the unit that would immediately go ahead, move out to the location, secure the scene, and do the decontamination and the mop-up of the area. So everything would be safe. Should there be a UFO crash, we would go out very quietly, extract the debris, go back to our organization, and deny it ever happened. And this has happened on many occasions. Now, the NBC teams were not the recovery teams per se. They had another organization for that. Initially, from what I can gather, CIC, Counterintelligence Corps, United States Army was involved. After the Air Force became a separate entity, the OSI, Office of Special Investigations, was involved because the people who were CIC in the Army became OSI when the Army became a separate sister service in 1947. Later on, the United States Air Force would go ahead and create a very elite intelligence unit. In 1953, they would create the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. That squadron had only wartime mission. Outside of training for that wartime mission, it had no peacetime missions. I would like to tell you more exploits of what I had while I was in the service, but that would take more time than what we have. What I'd like to do today is to show you that the American public forced us to go ahead and have a program that the public knew about to investigate UFOs. Now, we gave a classification of that program, and we said we can't talk about it, but the public knew about it. Therefore, everyone thought that that program was taking UFOs serious, that they were really desperately seeking answers. They were actually forbidden to seek those answers. When they did conclude that UFOs were interplanetary, they were immediately told by the higher-ups, no, you don't have the evidence. And if you don't have the evidence, don't you dare come up with that conclusion ever again. What the public didn't know about, a much more sophisticated, highly classified program was involved. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to go ahead and take us back through history, trying to show you where there was a parallel of that program. What it was called between, I believe we actually had it in place during the Second World War because we had things that we called Foo Fighters, both in the Pacific Theater and the Atlantic Theater, that we thought first was the Axis powers. The Axis powers thought it was some new weapon system of the Allies. Neither was the case, but we did have programs in place to start the investigation, and I do believe it goes all the way back to that time. In 1954, these two programs became officially named. The overall field exploitation program was known as Project Moondust. The actual three-man teams that went out and could draw upon the resources of the units such as I was in, the NBC quick reaction teams from any installations around the location where an event might occur, these three-man teams were known as Operation Blue Fly teams. They were the actual three-man recovery teams. They have been referred to on many occasions, but most people overlooked it and just thought, oh, well, that's Blue Book. If Blue Book headquarters sent 3 men out of their operations on many occasions, they would have had to have gone ahead and locked their doors, because very seldom was there ever more than 3 people there at Wright-Patterson assigned to Project Blue Book. If I could, I'd like for you to take a look at the first slide. This right here is known as the General Twining letter. General Twining did this letter, sent it forward to his boss. It was classified initially secret. Now, Twining doesn't say, this is my opinion. He states that this is the opinion of T2 and T3 people. These are the people who are doing the analysis of the reports that come in at the Air Force Air Material Command at Wright-Patterson. He stipulates that these objects are real and not visionary or fictitious. And he stipulates that there should be a program to investigate UFOs. This leads to December 30th, 1947, with the United States Air Force establishing Project Sign, the first publicly admitted investigation of unidentified flying objects. Our flying disc, as they were called back then. What happens is that they assign it an A2 priority, not all that high, and they give it a classification. They give it the classification of restricted. Later, this would change to secret. But throughout the tenure of Blue Book, you will never have a classification higher than secret. This is important. The other less known investigation that you were not to know about, Moondust and Blue Fly, that had a much higher classification, as we shall see as we go on. Now, if you'll take a look at slide 2, if you look down at paragraph 4, you will see that the Air Force informs their personnel that in order to investigate UFOs, what they should do is use CIC personnel. This is Counterintelligence Corps personnel. These people were not the Air Material Command personnel. These people right here were the best people to choose, because these were the people that were involved in doing the same thing during the Second World War. They went to Scandinavia during the Ghost rockets. Now remember what I said? December 30th, 1947, Project Sign came into existence. If you take a look up there, you'll see that letter is dated 4 February, 1948. What happens there is that the CIC is doing the investigation. They're not reporting to Project Sign. Those cases that were of public knowledge would be sent to Project Sign. But the more significant cases, those cases that could have some bearing on the national security, our national security concerns, would not become part of the Blue Book system. And we'll get to that as we go on. Now on slide 3, you will see that they come up with what's called Air Intelligence Memorandum number 4. This would later become what's called Air Intelligence Collection Letter number 4. According to the Air Force, no copies of that letter exists. It exists. It was updated sometime prior to 1987, and they refused to release it because it was currently improperly classified. But now the interesting thing about this letter is that, or this instruction, is that they already had Air Force Letter 200-5 that established the program of gathering data on UFOs here in the United States. By the way, Project Sign was to be a domestic collections unit for UFOs. We were not to investigate UFOs overseas. We all know that we did, and sometimes those wound up in the Blue Book files, but only those cases that we could explain away. The others went someplace else, and if they sent material to Blue Book, what would happen is that they had 4 Blue Fly project monitors there at the Air Material Command. Those people would go ahead and look at the UFO reports coming in first. If they were significant, they would automatically be ciphered right off the top, and they would not be forwarded to Blue Book. If the media had gotten a hold of a report, then you couldn't do that. You had to have a ghost file at Blue Book to give the appearance that Blue Book was doing the investigation. Therefore, you went ahead and said, okay, look, these pilots went ahead and saw this cigar-shaped craft come up. They had these windows, and they had these people waving, hi, guys, what's going on, like they were tourists. So let's see, how are we going to explain this? Well, let's see. Venus was shining bright that night. We will say that they saw Venus under unusual conditions. So that report goes to Blue Book, and Blue Book swears this is the response, and that their T2 people, their technical intelligence people, had went over it. Their contract astronomer concurred. Well, Venus was in that area, but maybe or maybe not the contract astronomer concurred. All they were concerned about, they had an answer, and the news media would have to accept it. End of story. The more significant information, the more valid information, was forwarded somewhere else. I will tell you, I think that was, in fact, Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The reason I state that was the headquarters after they moved them out of Ent Air Force Base for the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. Now, slide 4, you will see that the United States Air Force and the United States Army, in closed-door session, readily admits to the FBI in 1952 that they're concerned about nuclear installations, that these UFOs represent a potential threat to the security of those installations. Remember what I told you? Blue Book would never be more than secret. Top secret material could not become part of the Blue Book files. And if you go through the Blue Book files, you will find that everything, and remember, I'm saying Blue Book files. Somebody's going to come up and say, wait a minute, they had that Air Staff study in December of 48. That was a top secret document. This is true. But that was Air Force Continental Intelligence that had that report. The Air Force Systems Command did the report, did the study, but it did not involve Blue Book. It involved their T2 and T3 people going over the materials. That was, some of it was in Blue Book, but some of it was not. Some of it was someplace else. But please note here that the Air Force and the Army considered this material to be top secret. Who was getting the top secret material? Blue Book could not. They could not store it. They did not have the classification for it. By this time, it was, in fact, Project Blue Book. It was no longer Project Sign or Project Grudge. It was Blue Book. So who was getting the top secret material? Also, Blue Book was making it clear that we believe that UFOs are nothing more than misidentification of aircraft seen under unusual conditions, planets and stars seen under unusual conditions, are weather phenomena that people were not familiar of. You know, your basic, everyday, run-of-the-mill ball lightning. Well, no one after August of 1948, when they did the top-secret estimate of the situation, when the people at ATAC said, hey guys, look, UFOs are real. They exhibit an advanced technology. They're probably interplanetary spacecraft. This is why we state this. Well, General Holt Vandenberg, he blew his top. Where's your proof? God help us if these people have the evidence, because they're not supposed to get it. Well, they didn't have the proof. What they were alluding to was they were trusting the eyewitness statements, some of them who were highly trained scientific people who had filed reports thinking that their government would want to know this stuff. So we find out in slide 5, this being an FBI document dated October 27th, 1952, we find out that the FBI is told that some top military officials are seriously considering UFOs, or flying discs, as being interplanetary spaceships. Well, of course, by mandate, Project Blue Book has to go ahead and consider UFOs as something mundane. They cannot. They are forbidden without hard physical evidence to conclude they're interplanetary. Also, during this time frame, the Air Force, high brass, hierarchy, would meet with the CIA, and they would go ahead and decide, well, we should have some scientists who will come away around our thinking. They had the Robinson panel, and the Robinson panel met, and they are going to decide the future of UFOs. This was the CIA panel in January 1953. Guess what? The people from Blue Book, remember, they're forbidden to state that they're interplanetary, go there, and they present evidence. They tell the scientific panel, these are some of the best cases we have in our file. The people from Blue Book are stating that these are some of the best cases we have in our file. We have gone over this material. We have eliminated every other possibility, and they meticulously show the panel how they eliminated each and every possibility. We have only one conclusion. We believe these represent interplanetary spacecraft. The panel went ahead and said, no, that can't be. Then went ahead and said, well, these are relatively new reports, unevaluated raw data. We have to wait and see what they come up with. They go ahead and have some other people come up from the Naval Photo Interpretation Lab who spent hundreds of hours evaluating two pieces of film, the Montana film and the Utah film, dealing with UFOs. The Utah film, the panel is, those are geese. I was on vacation here in last year, and I saw high-flying geese that looked like that. That's what those are. The Montana film, oh, those were two F-94s coming in for a landing. That's all those were. The Naval Photo Interpretation Lab went ahead and showed how they had eliminated all of these possibilities. Yet these people who were back here at some coffee social for 5 days to appease the Air Force took all that data, all that hard work, all those hundreds of man-hours, and threw them down the tube and decided, no, we're not going to accept that. The people who said, well, wait a minute, these two UFOs that appear in the film in Montana, when we took those film footages, we saw the F-94s come in earlier. Now remember, the Naval Photo Interpretation Lab already stated that's not what these were. But in the infinite wisdom of those people there, everyone else had to be mistaken. Disregard the hundreds of man-hours spent by the Navy to do an interpretation, trying to find out what they were, eliminating what they weren't, that being the F-94s. Disregard that. Disregard what the people said they were mistaken. These were F-94s. So what do? Gee, you got these bigwig scientists who work for the CIA, they have to be right. So they go ahead and Blue Book files, and that's what they rule these are, because those scientists on the panel said so. So essentially, all of the data was ignored because the CIA panel already had a preconceived destination to go to, i.e., UFOs don't exist, and we should not suffer people to report them. The man on the street doesn't get all the detail. We want the good, hard cases. We have what's called open source intelligence. If you're on the street and you talk to the media about a UFO, and it's an interesting case, we'll pick up from that from your interview with the media. And we have people in the intelligence community, that's all they do is read papers and periodicals. Excuse me. If they find something of significance, because they know what they're looking for, they will come and visit you. Somebody from, today it exists, the 4602nd today is known as the 696 Air Intelligence Group at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. They might be vacuum cleaner salesmen. They might be insurance salesmen. They might be reporters. But I assure you, don't order a vacuum because you'll never receive it. Don't go ahead and give them a story because you'll never read about it. But this has happened. I've been there, done that. There's other people that have been there, done that. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at slide 6. In 1953, Air Force Letter 200-5, establishing Project Sign, then on into Project Grudge, then into Blue Book, the guidelines changed. It was no longer going to be Air Force Letter 200-5 that governed the program. They were going to have their own regulation. The 200 series deals with intelligence in the Air Force. So what you have here is an intelligence regulation establishing the UFO investigative program. Now remember I told you that Blue Book was primarily for the public awareness, for John Q. public in the U.S. to report UFOs. Well, essentially this is what this program set up. Blue Book would investigate those programs. The Director of Air Intelligence would handle the reports coming in from overseas. The Director of Air Intelligence would also be involved with those cases having any real significance. As a matter of fact, in Phoenix, Arizona, July 7th, 1947, 2 photographs was taken of a UFO. It would not be until 1952 that the man would ask for the pictures back. The man knew that he gave them to the Air Force because the FBI brought the guy from the Air Force over. So he wrote to the Air Force, Project Blue Book, says, can I have my pictures back? True Magazine wants to print them. Captain Ruppelt writes back, and he also notifies the Director of Air Intelligence, look, this guy's a liar. We don't have his photographs. We never received them. We don't have no file case. He never reported it to the Air Force. Well, he then contacts the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover was not going to take the fall for the Air Force. So he does a memo back to the Air Force and he says, listen guys, it's true. It wasn't the Air Force at the time that went there to get those photographs. It was a guy from the CIA. And he gives the name of the guy. What to do? The Air Force doesn't want to give up those original prints and those original negatives. These are really good photographs. They're not hoaxed. They had them analyzed, and they could find nothing wrong with them. But what are we going to tell Captain Ruppelt, head of Project Blue Book? We go back, we tell Captain Ruppelt, well, Captain, we do have the pictures. They're in one of two classified files identified as unidentified missiles. We're going to send you a copy of the print, and you will send those back to the individual telling them that this is all we have. And that's where it ended. Until the late 70s, early 80s, when this information was pried free. Once again, thanks to assertive efforts such as what Peter did as far as taking various government agencies to court. And I followed suit on that. A lot of times I was in a position where I could ask for documents where I knew they were and was able to pry them free. A lot of times they'd come back to commander of, and the Navy was real good at that. There was one letter that was attached to some stuff that I got back from the Navy to my commander that made it clear that my commander should sit down and talk to me because I should not be doing this. I'm biting the hand that feeds me. And that wasn't the hand that fed me. The first oath, or the first loyalty that any soldier has, is to the people of the country if he's a United States service member, not a branch of service, not the intelligence community. Now, this regulation is crucial because they immediately provided a change right after January of 1953, a change 1, to this regulation. The second page, which would be slide 7 of this reg, you will note paragraph 6. ZI, or Zone of the Interior Collections. That's continental United States. These cases would be investigated by the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you one of the most elite intelligence gathering organizations in the world. I also give you the birth of Project Moondust and Operation Blue Fly. From here on in, those programs would be involved with the Air Force's real official investigation that the American public was to never learn about. You will also note on down where they state that those cases that are reported overseas will be evaluated by the Directorate of Air Intelligence. So from there on in, the 4602nd would be involved. The 4602nd would have their own regulations. They also were the people who controlled the Ground Observers Corps. These were the people who came out with the 4602nd Regulation 200-2 to provide to their Ground Observers Corps to help them better identify objects such as weather balloons, planes, various planets, so they would get good reports from the Ground Observers Corps. Now on Chapter 8, or on Slide 8, the next slide on Slide 8, you'll see where I finally decided I was going to go and ask for specific information on Moondust and Blue Fly. And I decided to go ahead, fire off some letters on December the 25th, 1989. I already had those done, all ready to go off to these agencies because I was going to be out of the Army. I had put in my request for retirement. I was to retire on the 30th of November, 1989, with an effective date of 1 December. Those people who had a substantial interest in me staying in the Army went ahead and had my retirement orders revoked, And when I reported out process, all smiles, looking forward to be a proud, fun-loving civilian, I was told I was going to be attached for 2 months, pending approval of my retirement. So the letters went out, and I was still on active duty. Not a good situation to be in. So those letters went out to about, I think, 11 different intelligence organizations. We got some information back from the State Department. The State Department had other information. Oh, I'm sorry. The State Department had other information that had to go to the Air Force. The Air Force immediately went and informed, or the State Department immediately went and sent the documents off to the Air Force. I called the State Department. The State Department acknowledged to me that they did, in fact, have these documents that was supposed to go to the Air Force for their retention. Now, in accordance with Executive Order 12356, which is security information that's signed off by the President on how you would protect it, Section 3.4F1 states this, that when the mere existence or non-existence of information is within itself classifiable under that executive order or predecessor executive order, then an agency may stipulate that they may neither deny nor confirm the existence or non-existence of documentation. That means that that information is compartmentalized. That means that that information is under what we call SCI, Sensitive Compartmented Information, or ESI, Extremely Sensitive Information. It's governed by Department of Defense Directive 5200.1 PH. That's a secret directive, by the way, but the name is not. Now, we will note here that projects or operations known as Blue Fly, Moon Dust, AFCINSOP, that stands for Air Force Continental Intelligence Command Standard Operating Procedure, or ICGL number 4, Intelligence Collection General Letter number 4, as any other response could reveal classified information concerning military plans, weapons, or operations under Sections 1.3A1 of Executive Order 12356, National Security Information. Well, my request is being denied. They didn't have to tell me it was being denied. All they had to do was tell me that they could neither deny nor confirm. They didn't do this. What ultimately happened is that I appealed this request here. Actually, I tried on several occasions to do that. They came back and was telling me that this June 5th, 1991 letter was all that I was going to get. I could take them to court. Not having the money to take them to court, it died real quick. But I wasn't about to give up. I decided that Congress really was a servant of me, of the American people, and that they had an obligation to me and to the American people to assist me in trying to obtain the truth from an agency that did not want it to tell the truth about events and things that affected all of our lives. So on the next slide, you see where I go and request the assistance of members of Congress. This is just one letter. There were 4 different members of Congress that I requested assistance to. If you'll notice on the second paragraph, there is no agency, nor has there ever been, at Fort Belvoir which would deal with UFOs or have any information concerning the incident at Roswell. In addition, there is no Project Moondust or Operation Blue Fly. These missions have never existed. Well, it was now kind of necessary to go ahead and convince the Air Force that they really were involved in Moondust and Blue Fly. So we sent back through the senators' offices 28 attachments to a letter appealing this right here, saying, don't no easy way to put this, guys. We can't say you're wrong. You're liars. It's as simple as that. You lied to a United States Senator. So, in the next slide, you see where they come back and they state, this is in reply to your inquiry on behalf of Mr. Clifford E. Stone on the accuracy of the information we previously provided to your office. Upon further review of the case, which was aided by the several attachments of Mr. Stone's letter, we wish to amend the statements contained in the previous response to your inquiry. I understand that they will throw a party the day I die, so this will never be going on again. Shame on me for doing this. But the interesting thing is they go in here and they state this is all to do with wartime mission. Ladies and gentlemen, Project Moondust is a peacetime mission. It has nothing to do with their wartime mission. Project Blue Fly, our Operation Blue Fly, is a peacetime mission. It has nothing to do with their wartime mission. Their wartime mission is what it says here. Moondust is the overall field exploitation program for only two things: objects that survive re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere that are of non-U.S. origin, meaning if they are Soviet, we're naturally going to be interested in the technical capabilities of that debris to determine if they have something new that we should know about. The other thing is objects of unknown origin. And I can tell you right now, under that program, we have recovered objects of unknown origin, so unknown that we even concluded they were not of earthly origin. Operation Blue Fly. Operation Blue Fly was the three-man Air Force team that went out to anywhere in the world that was prepared to move out on a moment's notice to go do an extraction of this type of a debris, and if need be, go in covertly without anyone knowing they were there, and leave covertly without anyone ever knowing that they had been there. So we were not really satisfied with the Air Force coming back on with this response here, telling them that this is a situation when we knew better. So I decided that I saw a document in 1969. I remembered the name of the document, and it specifically talked about an incident that happened at Kecksburg. It specifically talked about some parallels with Roswell. What do? Well, you shouldn't ask for it by name. But I've never been very good about doing things the way I should do it. So on the next slide, this is my letter on slide 12. This is the letter of September 25th, 1992. If you will note, paragraph 1, I ask for what was called Operation Blue Fly Report 314. In 1969, this report existed as Operation Blue Fly Report 314. Now, I know that's what it was called because I saw it. I almost walked out with it because they were going to release all this stuff anyhow. Anyhow, I was told, well, let us properly declassify it. You come back next week and we'll let you have it. Okay. I went back the next week. Here it was, big, three-leaf loose ring folder with a little acrylic latch on it, all this good stuff. And I thought, I'm really getting this. I bet you my heart was racing 1,000 beats a minute. Then I opened it up. Guess what I had? No. All the pages was there, everything, except this was a civil defense directive. I can tell you what they did in the 1960s and even went into the early 70s with the civil defense, because all the stuff was there. And I went back to the classifications NCO, the Classified Documents Control Non-Commissioned Officer, and I said, this isn't what I saw And, oh, yes, it was. So we discussed it. And he says, I have no idea what you're talking about. He did, because he was the one that I'd talked to earlier. But I let it ride. When I ask for it, guess what happens? Never get it back. Get a response back telling me they have no records. January 2nd, 1993, I appeal this request. On December 13th, 1994, after not getting a response back to that appeal, deciding that they had lost it, and after Congress had went ahead and received response, I go ahead with the next slide. I ask at this time for all the records they say that doesn't exist, that they had never heard of it. I sent documents to show that you have to have records. This is the first page. The next slide is the second page of the December 13th, 1994 letter. And I want to make it clear that, you know, if you guys are nice enough to let me have this stuff, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share it with the world. I don't think they like that. But this letter right here has a unique history. When I sent this off, I once again notified 4 members of Congress: Senators Bingaman and Domeninci's office, Congressman Schiff's office, and forgive me, I forget the name of the other the other congressman right there in our own state, but I notified him too. At the same time, about the same time frame, Schiff was involved in trying to get the General Accounting Office to tell us what was going on as far as Roswell. I went ahead and did a report a 171-page report, and provided it to members of Senate of the U.S. Congress. I also went ahead and provided this right here to members of the General Accounting Office, and I provided it to members of the Air Force that was supposed to be involved. Once Weaver released his report, then I called Colonel Weaver and I asked, excuse me, what did you find out about moon dust and blue fly? Remember, they still haven't responded to this letter by that time neither. I was informed we found nothing about moon dust and blue fly. Never heard of them. What about the Blue Room? Never heard of it. Then I said, well then, sir, I doubt very seriously you're going to find out anything about crash retrievals, because moon dust and blue fly is where it happens. And where do you go and do the analysis? It's called the Blue Room. That's there at Wright-Patterson. None other than Senator Barry Goldwater asked to see inside of that. He was informed, no, that will never happen. The technical intelligence and the what we call T3, which is the electronics intelligence, takes place there. Telemetry takes place there. That's with the radars, and even photographic analysis takes place there. Very sophisticated place. Doesn't exist, of course. I mean, you know, the Air Force would not want you to know that it exists. But Barry Goldwater could not see this non-existent place. He was told never to ask to see inside of it again. Well, I got really upset about not getting no response. They lost the January 2nd, 1992 appeal action on moon dust and blue fly. So in the next letter, you see where they come back, and the United States Senator's office informs me from Senator Pete Domeninci's office, informs me that they had contacted the FOIA office to try to find out what was going on with my request. This was March 21st, 1995. In the next letter, once again another senator's letter, you'll see in the second paragraph that they have in fact found not my appeal, but please note it's the original letter. You saw it up here earlier where I was asking for Operation Blue Fly Report 314. Please note in the second paragraph, one appeal dated September 25th, 1992. That was the original letter. The appeal was January 2nd, my birthday, 1992. What happened to the appeal letter? I would not find out until I started to talk to members of the Air Force at the litigation office. It got lost in the vault. The vault means that letter that you saw up here, the September 25th, 1992 letter, that was at least a top secret letter. So please, when you leave here, don't tell anybody that you saw that letter. I might get in trouble. The whole situation is a document was attached. They had something attached to that. Maybe they were calling me names and they attached it to it and decided to classify it because it might be embarrassing to the Air Force for me to find out that they were calling me names. I don't think that's what it was. I think what they had attached to it was that non-existent document, Operation Blue Fly Report 314. Anyhow, they sent this back and they informed them, we're working on it. We'll get to you as soon as possible. Well, now if we go to the next letter, here they come back and they state that on April the 4th, that they have no records. They combined them all together, and that they can find absolutely no records at all as to what I was talking about. And this is crucial. Remember this, because what I'm about to tell you after we're finished with this letter, this is the last letter I get from the Air Force. Please note down Operation Blue Fly Report, the very last paragraph. Operation Blue Fly was originated in the Air Defense Command during the Korean War to establish intelligence teams to visit crash sites in the United States to remove down Soviet bloc pilots and equipment, and existed until the 1970s. Wrong. Sometime prior to 1987, they changed the name. Its mission had been enlarged to include space objects and UFOs, if any were ever reported down in the United States. Well, they go ahead and state none were ever reported, that none of the Soviet bloc equipment was reported. Well, there is reference to a three-man team in the Kecksburg case in the Blue Book files. A three-man team is sent to pick up a object that fell and started a fire. Now, I've been criticized by a debunker because in my book I include that. The intent was to show you there was a three-man team that went to pick up something that fell. I didn't include the whole Blue Book file in there. All I wanted you to see was that where it stipulated the three-man team. That's what's important here. He wanted to make it clear, and I'm going to make it clear here, the three-man team informed Blue Book that they didn't recover any object, and that was it. And there was a picture, not of a fireball with a fire trail. No, there was a little speck of light picture that appeared with the file of a photograph that was taken of the alleged object that crashed while it was still airborne. And it looks like a little disc like in the sky. I mean, that's what it appears. It has no tail like you would expect a fireball to have. But that's what it was called. Officially, it was a fireball. It went down there. But they didn't find any debris. I was kind of confused this team was not about to tell Blue Book that they had recovered debris. There was no way they were going to do that. Also, where they state that there was never any Soviet craft that went down, and these teams were never utilized. It's not left to our imagination about what that three-man team was. In the next slide, which is a project or Operation Blue Fly document, this is the second page of the letter that we just saw. The other slide, this one right here, this was a formerly secret page from one of the Blue Book file, or Blue Fly files, that stipulates that on March 20th, 1964, a Cuban Hound helicopter lands in Key West, Florida. Guess what? Blue Fly's activated. The Air Force just said in that other letter it didn't happen. Now, I had this document prior. It was released to me. But you want me to tell you what's really kind of strange? That letter that said there was no documentation, this was attached to it. Why the guy didn't read and say, well, we only used it one time. That was on this case here. No, it was never used. And this was attached to the letter. I went back and asked if they fully read their correspondence. You know what I was told? No, we're told about the existence of some pages they're sending to you, but they are not documents per se. We didn't see the documents. I tried to educate the guy, and I think, he wasn't real happy about that, but he never got back with me on it. Well, what I'm trying to illustrate with these slides here is that the Air Force came to three firm conclusions. Those conclusions go all the way back to when they actually started Project Sign. One, no UFO reported and evaluated had ever given any indication of being a threat to the United States of America. Point being, anytime you have an unidentified object that violates your airspace, you have a potential, I must stress, potential threat to the security of your country. So they do represent a threat to the national security of the United States by virtue of violating our airspace. Two, no UFO reported and evaluated by the United States Air Force has given any indication of exhibiting technological developments above and beyond our present-day capabilities. If this is truly the case, why do we have documents that have been released thanks to the Freedom of Information Act that indicate that UFOs, such as in Brazil in 1980, I believe it was, an Su-22 fires point-blank cannon fire to UFO, and the UFO takes off like it was getting hit with beans from a bean shooter, like nothing had happened. We have no aircraft that could survive that type of fire. An Su-22, I think, fires a 37-millimeter cannon. But point-blank cannon fire, and it takes off like nothing happens. September 19th, 1976, two F-4 Iranian fighters tried to intercept a UFO. What happens? The first F-4 loses all onboard communications, thinking something's wrong. He requests permission to return to base, and it's granted. Once he's out of range no longer a threat to a UFO, the UHF, VHF radio systems come back on. He now has communications. Second F-4 fighter closes in. This time, when he loses onboard communications, he attempts to fire upon the UFO, at which time he loses all onboard weapon systems. We were involved in gathering data on that, by the way. What's released is not what all we have. The documents that are released tell you what I've just told you. But we did technical analysis of everything we could on that. We sent teams there, and I know that for a fact. Everything was filtered through what was called Det 24 U.S. Special Activities Center at Lindsay Air Force Base there in Germany. That's why when you hear about what happened at Bentwaters, stating that everything was sent to Germany, sure was. Before it was sent to the States, it went there to Lindsay Air Force Base. Also, SHAPE headquarters had to be briefed. So part of the material was put up for that. 3, no UFO reported and evaluated by the U.S. Air Force has given any indication that they are of interplanetary or extraterrestrial origin. The documentation released to date does not clearly point that out, but it does point that there exists an intelligence behind the phenomena that is exhibiting a technology above and beyond our present day capability to replicate. The point that I'm trying to make right here is that in December 17th, 1969, we should no longer have documentation dealing with UFOs. In this book you find, this is my most recent book, you find there's documentation going into the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Documentation that if the Air Force believed their own conclusions shouldn't exist. But let me tell you what really happened. We no longer wanted the reports from the man on the street. Peter said it best. We in the intelligence community have the best means of gathering data on UFOs. We don't have to rely on the man on the street to report them to us. We can digest that which we gather through electronic means and provide some type of adequate intelligence product from which we can use to draw upon as far as making conclusions and recommendations and contingency plans, should we ever have the incident where any of these situations turn out to be hostile. And it was said best in the Boliner memo. When Colonel Boliner was asked what did he think about terminating Blue Book, he stated this: those cases which could have any bearing or effect on national security were never meant to be, nor are they, part of the Blue Book system. He further stipulated that, of course, if we do away with Blue Book, there would be no officially admitted program in which the man on the street could report UFOs. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I leave you today, I would like for you to take into consideration this. UFOs have not gone away, although we tried by stating we were no longer going to investigate UFOs. We tried to make them go away. I can tell you, during the 22 and a half years that I was in the military, we did things you're never going to read about in the book. Things were recovered you're never going to read about. But we didn't have all the answers. We're still desperately seeking Susan. We know officially that there is some type of intelligence that exhibits a highly evolved advanced technology, perhaps not 100 years or 200 years ahead of us, but we actually believe that probably 1 to 2 billion years ahead of us. And I'm going to go after after the documentation to prove that. I'm doing something that I wasn't going to do ever in my life. I'm writing about my experiences in the military. And I guess that's the purpose for me talking. Because, see, for 22 and a half years while I was doing this in the military, it would always be, you're the clerk, but you're going to be called for this stuff and you're going to be called for that stuff. So as a sense of duty I had, I did that. I put my family second, and I'd go and I'd do what I had to do. This wound up with my family not really knowing me, and I would not really find this out until July of 1995. I was working security at the mall, the Roswell Mall. I was head of security there. We got word that we had a signal 30. At that time I went out. The signal 30 means that you have a traffic accident involving a death. I went out and I found that my 19-year-old son had been killed in a motorcycle accident. I was the first there. But there's a whole lot more to this, and I mean, you know, that's the time you really come close together as a family. And my family was criticizing me because I wasn't there for this, I wasn't there for that. But see, you can't talk about this. You're not permitted to talk. You have to keep it in you. It eats at your soul. I mean, it really does. But it's time for all of it to come out. And come, pardon my French on this, but come hell or high water, I know what I went through, but I wasn't alone. There were other people out there who know more about it. I don't have the answers. I have nightmares because of the things we did, but we need to get those answers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand we have some time for questions. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions you have. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I served as the director of research for the UFO Enigma Museum. Well, they sold the building, so we had to move out of there. But it will be resurrected in the very near future. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There's been aircraft lost trying to pursue, even shoot down UFOs. Not only in the United States, but even the Japanese have lost fighters, the Germans have lost fighters, the Soviet Union lost fighters as early as, I think, July or August or September of 1989. They lost 3 fighters. So this kind of activity does go on. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were of a hostile nature. It could be that they were taking means to defend themselves. Yes, sir. I'm not aware of that particular case, but like at Bentwaters, when that happened, I was woke up. My involvement started on December 28th, 1980. I was woke up at 3 in the morning, and I wouldn't be coming back till I think it was the 11th of January, but very quietly. We had flights that took off, taking team members over to do what they were supposed to do. These were specialized teams to do specific aspects of that area. I think we had a total of 15 flights, some even originating from in the United States, that went there, and they were told, these flights aren't coming. We even had high officials from Washington that went there.
Francesco Poliomeni actually published that particular situation where there was 30 or 40 UFOs that formed a cross over St. Peter's Square Claire Booth Luce was the ambassador to Italy at that time, and she was sworn to secrecy also. But Tom Towers played Al Chop in that movie, the ATIC man. Okay, do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it was titled UFOs, The True Story of Flying
Right,
Saucers.
exactly. But anyway, we saw all of this, and I thought, you mean to tell me that a senator was threatened to keep his mouth shut by top Air Force officials if he knew it was good for him? I said, this sounds to me like, if you do anything, we're going to kill you.
To exterminate with extreme prejudice.
Right. I just wanted to know that I knew about that particular thing. Thank you very much for what you've said.
Thank you, sir.
Has the government threatened you with prosecution on breaking your security oath, lifetime security oath?
I've had threats. I try to avoid that because I don't want to get involved in a conspiracy type situation, but as a matter of fact, I was going to visit Peter once. This was back while I was still in the military, and one of the most scariest airplane rides I ever had. But yeah, I've had threats. I had I think it was CBS that came to talk to me, and I talked open about some activities. It's hard for me to talk open, but I talked to a lady by the name of Katie, and she got it on film. Then she started to leave and pack up, and I guess they thought she was gone because I got a call, and they immediately told me, you better watch your mouth. Then I had my car messed up with, I thought was a battery problem, and then I stopped at a store, went back, and it still wouldn't work. Found out that there was a fuse that was blown, but also after we fixed that, it was like they were trying to tell me, we can get into your car and make it look like an accident, because my car wouldn't start. There's nothing wrong with my car. I called a friend of mine. He came down. He tightened the battery cable up, and it started right off. The only problem was the battery cable was never loose. I got a call. They told me everything I did while I was there, and they told me, says, that could have been something like a fuel line that was leaking, and you could have started it over, and it could have hit the hot manifold and blown up, and you would have been history to just be another tragic accident. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I didn't hear you mention anything concerning crash retrievals in general, especially like the Roswell case, and also some of the research gone into the MJ-12 situation. So I'd like to hear your take on either MJ-12, and which would verify what Stanton Friedman's come up with, and also the various crash retrievals that Len Stringfield has come up with. I'd like to hear your take on if you've run across documents or what your general opinion is on that.
When it comes to crash retrievals, I'll state this. We have recovered sometimes crashes, and maybe we even assisted in bringing some of these objects down by hostile acts. We may have actually shot some down. I do not believe that we have recovered hundreds of crashes. I believe they may number in a couple of dozen. We're talking about a highly evolved technological race that has developed these objects. They didn't make them so they would just fly here for a one-way trip and break down. So yes, I'm aware of the fact that we have recovered objects in part and in whole. I'm also aware of the fact that we're talking about a technology that is so highly evolved, so advanced, that we would even be interested in their garbage. So if there is any debris, any possibility that we could pick up just minute microns of debris, of, say, the substance their craft might be made of, we would go there anywhere in the world just to try to retrieve that. So these teams were used on more than just going to recover the whole objects in part, but even debris they would go to try to pick up if they knew that the debris was there. As far as the MJ-12, there exists, I'm certain, a group very similar to the MJ-12. Is it called MJ-12? I never ran across MJ-12. I ran across such things as Composite Team 1, Group 3, like what you saw there, Composite Team 1, Group 7, which I had a lot of interface with. There was 3 composite teams, and there were 8 groups to each. There was 8 groups to each of the composite teams. Now, when DIA took those over, I don't know what they did with those. The NSA was very actively involved. You had special teams that were joint forces. Normally these people would not be used to where they could go ahead and go back to their billets and compare notes. But if you're asking, is there some structured group that has control over this, that is not concerned whether they're going to be in office in the next election, yes, I concur with that. There has to be. By the nature of the beast, there has to be a small cell within the intelligence community that controls this data.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You worked with Blue Fly teams, right?
I was involved with Blue Fly teams, yes, sir.
Do you think they had access to Special Operations Manual 101?
I think that they had access to a manual very similar to that, absolutely. The reason I state that is that when you went out, you had containment units, and you know what I'm referring to, the containment units. If there was any possibility that you had a bleed-off of, say, biological products from a crash, or if you had any type of harmful radiation, then you would have to contain that in order to ensure that no one was put in harm's way before you shipped it. When you got the craft, you also had to go ahead and try to ensure that no damage came to the craft while you were shipping it. So you had a manual that told you how to package it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi. You said that when you first enlisted, you were introduced to a man and you were subsequently classified as a clerk. However, you met somebody who talked to you about UFOs. Can you elaborate on that initiation of yours?
Let me be as open as I possibly can on this. The question is about the individual I met while I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, who started to talk to me about UFOs and readily let me know that he knew about my lifelong interest even as a child with UFOs. I was medically rejected from military service. Somebody wanted me in the military. When it came time for me to get out, and I thought they'd actually be happy because they were going to court-martial me. They were trying to force my retirement early while I was there in Roswell in the military. But that didn't happen. I wound up going on to Germany. No, the person that met me there I was going to be an unwitting participant in this stuff. I won't go into detail why they want me, but I'm pretty sure I know why. But it was pre-designed. I was going to get in the military, and this is what I was going to do, and this is what I'd be used for. But there was an indoctrination period, and that was the start of it. Being a clerk, for example, when we'd go out and they needed photographs of debris, we didn't notify PAO and say, send us out a photographer. You know who we notified? Right there in Hanau, Germany. We notified the post chapel. There was a 71 mic there, a chaplain's assistant. And with the chaplain's assistant, he would come out. He was trained by CTC, Central Texas College, as a photographer. The United States Army paid for that. He got all kinds of equipment that was for him to keep, even to set up an elaborate black room as a hobby. That was paid for by the United States Army. No one could ever trace these teams back to their point of origin. Because where you think that you're looking for them, they're not there. Would you think to look for a photographer on one of these programs as to be a 71 mic? No. Would you think of a profiler being a 71 Bravo or 71 Lima working administration? No. Would you think a tech analyst being a 71 Lima? No. So the intent is for you never to locate the real people that are involved. Even the commanders get a little concerned. Because, see, they can't stop you from going. I hope that answered your question. I'm going to be here, so if there's any more questions, please feel free to approach me and ask me, but I understand they're getting ready for the next speaker. And once again, I really appreciate your courtesy and bearing through this with me on me giving my talk. I apologize for not being the best speaker in the world.
Do I get one?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, again.
Do I get one? I can't have it. Too bad.